This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Corrie Samuel. The Wood Beyond the World by William Morris. Chapter 18. The Maid Gives Walter Tryst. Now on the morrow, when Walter was awake, he found there was no one lying beside him, and the day was no longer very young. So he arose, and went through the garden from end to end, and all about, and there was none there. And albeit that he dreaded to meet the lady there, yet was he sad at heart, and fearful of what might betide. Howsoever, he found the gate whereby they had entered yesterday, and he went out into the little dale. But when he had gone a step or two, he turned about, and could see neither garden nor fence, nor any sign of what he had seen thereof but lately. He knit his brow, and stood still to think of it, and his heart grew the heavier thereby. But presently he went his ways and crossed the stream, but had scarce come up onto the grass on the further side, ere he saw a woman coming to meet him. And at first, full as he was of the tide of yesterday and the wondrous garden, deemed that it would be the lady. But the woman stayed her feet, and stooping, laid a hand on her right ankle, and he saw that it was the maid. He drew anigh to her, and saw that she was naught so sad of countenance as the last time she had met him, but flushed of cheek and bright-eyed. As he came up to her, she made a step or two to meet him, holding out her two hands, then refrained her, and said, smiling, "Ah, friend, belike this shall be the last time that I shall say to thee, touch me not, nay, not so much as my hand, or if it were but the hem of my raiment." The joy grew up in his heart, and he gazed on her fondly, and said, "Why? What hath befallen of late?" "O friend," she began, "this hath befallen." But as he looked on her, the smile died from her face, and she became deadly pale to the very lips. She looked askance to her left side, whereas ran the stream, and Walter followed her eyes, and deemed for one instant that he saw the misshapen yellow visage of the dwarf peering round from a grey rock, but the next there was nothing. Then the maid, though she was as pale as death, went on in a clear, steady, hard voice, wherein was no joy or kindness, keeping her face to Walter and her back to the stream. "This hath befallen, friend, that there is no longer any need to refrain thy love, nor mine. Therefore I say to thee, come to my chamber, and it is the red chamber over against thine, though thou knewest it not, an hour before this next midnight, and then thy sorrow and mine shall be at an end. And now I must needs depart, follow me not, but remember." And therewith she turned about, and fled like the wind down the stream. But Walter stood wondering, and knew not what to make of it, whether it were for good or ill. For he knew now that she had paled, and been seized with terror because of the upheaving of the ugly head. And yet she had seemed to speak out the very thing she had to say. Howsoever it were, he spake aloud to himself, "Whatever comes, I will keep tryst with her." Then he drew his sword, and turned this way and that, looking all about, if he might see any sign of the evil thing, but nought might his eyes behold, save the grass, and the stream, and the bushes of the dale. So then, still holding his naked sword in his hand, he clomb the bent out of the dale, for that was the only way he knew to the Golden House. And when he came to the top, and the summer breeze blew in his face, and he looked down a fair green slope, beset with goodly oaks and chestnuts, he was refreshed with the life of the earth, and he felt the good sword in his fist, and knew that there was might and longing in him, and the world seemed open unto him. So he smiled, if it were somewhat grimly, and sheathed his sword, and went on toward the house. Chapter 19. Walter goes to fetch home the lion's hide. He entered the cool dusk through the porch, and, looking down the pillared hall, saw, beyond the fountain, a gleam of gold. And when he came past the said fountain, he looked up to the high seat, and lo, the lady sitting there, clad in her queenly raiment. She called to him, and he came, and she hailed him, and spake graciously and calmly, yet as if she knew naught of him, save as the leal servant of her, a high lady. Squire, she said, we have deemed it meet to have the hide of the servant of the enemy, the lion to wit, whom thou slewest yesterday, for a carpet to our feet. Wherefore go now, take thy wood knife, and flay the beast, and bring me home his skin. This shall be all thy service for this day. So mayest thou do it at thine own leisure, and not weary thyself. May good go with thee. He bent the knee before her, and she smiled on him graciously, but reached out no hand for him to kiss, and heeded him but little. Wherefore, in spite of himself, and though he knew somewhat of her guile, he could not help marvelling that this should be she who had lain in his arms night long but of late. Howso that might be, he took his way toward the thicket where he had slain the lion, and came thither by then it was afternoon, at the hottest of the day. So he entered therein, and came to the very place whereas the lady had lain, when she fell down before the terror of the lion, and there was the mark of her body on the grass where she had lain that while, like as it were the form of a hare. But when Walter went on to where he had slain that great beast, lo, he was gone, and there was no sign of him, but there were Walter's own footprints, and the two shafts which he had shot, one feathered red and one blue. He said at first, belike some one hath been here, and hath had the carcass away. Then he laughed in very despite, and said, how may that be, since there are no signs of dragging away of so huge a body, and no blood or fur on the grass if they had cut him up, and moreover no trampling of feet, as if there had been many men at the deed. Then was he all abashed, and again laughed in scorn of himself, and said, forsooth I deemed I had done manly, but now forsooth I shot naught, and naught there was before the sword of my father's son. And what may I deem now, but that this is a land of mere lies, and that there is naught real and alive therein save me? Yea, belike even these trees and the green grass will presently depart from me, and leave me falling down through the clouds. Therewith he turned away, and gat him to the road that led to the golden house, wondering what next should befall him, and going slowly as he pondered his case. So came he to that first thicket where they had lost their quarry by water. So he entered the same, musing, and bathed him in the pool that was therein, after he had wandered about it a while, and found nothing new. So again he set him to the homeward road, when the day was now waning, and it was near sunset that he was come nigh unto the house, though it was hidden from him as then by a low bent that rose before him, and there he abode and looked about him. Now as he looked, over the said bent came the figure of a woman, who stayed on the brow thereof, and looked all about her, and then ran swiftly down to meet Walter, who saw at once that it was the maid. She made no stay then till she was but 3 paces from him, and then she stooped down and made the sign to him, and then spake to him breathlessly, and said, hearken, but speak not till I have done. I bade thee to night's meeting, because I saw that there was one anigh whom I must needs beguile. But by thine oath, and thy love, and all that thou art, I adjure thee, come not unto me this night as I bade thee, but be hidden in the hazel copse outside the house as it draws toward midnight, and abide me there. Dost thou hearken, and wilt thou? Say yes or no in haste, for I may not tarry a moment of time. Who knoweth what is behind me? Yes, said Walter hastily, but friend and love. No more, she said, hope the best. And turning from him, she ran away swiftly, not by the way she had come, but sideways, as though to reach the house by fetching a compass. But Walter went slowly on his way, thinking within himself that now, at that present moment, there was naught for it but to refrain him from doing, and to let others do. Yet deemed he that it was little manly to be as the pawn upon the board, pushed about by the will of others. Then, as he went, he bethought him of the maiden's face and aspect as she came running to him, and stood before him for that minute, and all eagerness he saw in her, and saw love of him, and distress of soul, all blent together. So came he to the brow of the bent, whence he could see lying before him, scarce more than a bowshot away, the golden house, now gilded again and reddened by the setting sun. And even therewith came a gay image toward him, flashing back the level rays from gold and steel and silver, and lo, there was come the king's son. They met presently, and the king's son turned to go beside him, and said merrily, I give thee good even, my lady's squire. I owe thee something of courtesy, whereas it is by thy means that I shall be made happy, both to-night and to-morrow, and many to-morrows, and sooth it is, that but little courtesy have I done thee hitherto. His face was full of joy, and the eyes of him shone with gladness. He was a goodly man, but to Walter he seemed an ill one, and he hated him so much that he found it no easy matter to answer him. But he refrained himself, and said, I can thee thank, king's son, and good it is that some one is happy in this strange land. Art thou not happy then, squire of my lady? Said the other. Walter had no mind to show this man his heart, nay, nor even a corner thereof, for he deemed him an enemy. So he smiled sweetly, and somewhat foolishly, as a man luckily in love, and said, Oh yea, yea, why should I not be so? How might I be otherwise? Yea then, said the king's son, why didst thou say that thou wert glad some one is happy? Who is unhappy, deemest thou? And he looked on him keenly. Walter answered slowly, Said I so? I suppose then that I was thinking of thee, for when I first saw thee, yea, and afterwards, thou didst seem heavy-hearted and ill-content. The face of the king's son cleared at this word, and he said, Yea, so it was. For look you, both ways it was. I was unfree, and I had sown the true desire of my heart, whereas it waxed not. But now I am on the brink and verge of freedom, and presently shall my desire be blossomed. Nay now, squire, I deem thee a good fellow, though it may be somewhat of a fool, so I will no more speak riddles to thee. Thus it is, the maid hath promised me all mine asking, and is mine, and in 2 or 3 days, by her helping also, I shall see the world again. Quoth Walter, smiling askance on him, And the lady, what shall she say to this matter? The king's son reddened, but smiled falsely enough, and said, Sir squire, thou knowest enough not to need to ask this. Why should I tell thee that she accounteth more of thy little finger than of my whole body. Now I tell thee hereof freely, first, because this my fruition of love, and my freeing from thraldom, is, in a way, of thy doing. For thou art become my supplanter, and hast taken thy place with yonder lovely tyrant. Fear not for me, she will let me go. As for thyself, see thou to it. But again I tell thee hereof, because my heart is light and full of joy, and telling thee will pleasure me, and cannot do me any harm. For if thou say, How if I carry the tale to my lady? I answer, Thou wilt not. For I know that thine heart hath been somewhat set on the jewel that my hand holdeth, and thou knowest well on whose head the lady's wrath would fall, and that would be neither thine nor mine. Thou sayest sooth, said Walter, neither is treason my want. So they walked on silently a while, and then Walter said, But how if the maiden had nay said thee? What hadst thou done then? By the heavens, said the king's son fiercely, she should have paid for her naysay, then would I. But he broke off, and said quietly, yet somewhat doggedly, Why talk of what might have been? She gave me her yea-say pleasantly and sweetly. Now Walter knew that the man lied, so he held his peace thereon. But presently he said, When thou art free, wilt thou go to thine own land again? Yea, said the king's son, she will lead me thither. And wilt thou make her thy lady and queen when thou comest to thy father's land? Said Walter. The king's son knit his brow, and said, When I am in mine own land, I may do with her what I will, but I look for it that I shall do no otherwise with her, than that she shall be well content. Then the talk between them dropped, and the king's son turned off toward the wood, singing and joyous. But Walter went soberly toward the house. Forsooth he was not greatly cast down, for besides that he knew that the king's son was false, he deemed that under this double tryst lay something which was a-doing in his own behalf. Yet was he eager and troubled, if not downhearted, and his soul was cast about betwixt hope and fear. Chapter 20. Walter is bidden to another tryst. So came he into the pillared hall, and there he found the lady walking to and fro by the high seat. And when he drew nigh, she turned on him, and said in a voice rather eager than angry, What hast thou done, squire? Why art thou come before me? He was abashed, and bowed before her, and said, O gracious lady, thou badest me service, and I have been about it. She said, Tell me then, tell me what hath betided. Lady, said he, when I entered the thicket of thy swooning, I found there no carcass of the lion, nor any sign of the dragging away of him. She looked full in his face for a little, and then went to her chair, and sat down therein, and in a little while spake to him in a softer voice, and said, Did I not tell thee that some enemy had done that unto me? And lo, now thou seest that so it is. Then was she silent again, and knit her brows, and set her teeth, and thereafter she spake harshly and fiercely. But I will overcome her, and make her days evil, but keep death away from her, that she may die many times over, and know all the sicknesses of the heart, when foes be nigh, and friends afar, and there is none to deliver. Her eyes flashed, and her face was dark with anger. But she turned and caught Walter's eyes, and the sternness of his face, and she softened at once, and said, But thou, this hath little to do with thee, and now to thee I speak. Now cometh even and night. Go thou to thy chamber, and there shalt thou find raiment worthy of thee. What thou now art, and what thou shalt be, do on the same, and make thyself most goodly, and then come thou hither, and eat and drink with me, and afterwards depart whither thou wilt, till the night has worn to its midmost, and then come thou to my chamber, to wit, through the ivory door in the gallery above, and then and there shall I tell thee a thing, and it shall be for the weal both of thee and of me, but for the grief and woe of the enemy." Therewith she reached her hand to him, and he kissed it, and departed, and came to his chamber, and found raiment there before rich beyond measure. And he wondered if any new snare lay therein, yet if there were, he saw no way whereby he might escape it. So he did it on, and became as the most glorious of kings, and yet lovelier than any king of the world. Sithence he went his way into the pillared hall, when it was now night, and without the moon was up, and the trees of the wood as still as images. But within the hall shone bright with many candles, and the fountain glittered in the light of them, as it ran tinkling sweetly into the little stream, and the silvern bridges gleamed, and the pillars shone all round about. And there, on the dais, was a table dight most royally, and the lady sitting thereat, clad in her most glorious array, and behind her the maid, standing humbly, yet clad in precious web of shimmering gold, but with feet unshod, and the iron ring upon her ankle. So Walter came his ways to the high seat, and the lady rose and greeted him, and took him by the hands, and kissed him on either cheek, and sat him down beside her. So they fell to their meat, and the maid served them, but the lady took no more heed of her than if she were one of the pillars of the hall, but Walter she caressed oft with sweet words, and the touch of her hand, making him drink out of her cup, and eat out of her dish. As to him, he was bashful by seeming, but verily fearful. He took the lady's caresses with what grace he might, and durst not so much as glance at her maid. Long indeed seemed that banquet to him, and longer yet endured the weariness of his abiding there, kind to his foe, and unkind to his friend. For after the banquet they still sat a while, and the lady talked much to Walter about many things of the ways of the world, and he answered what he might, distraught as he was with the thought of those two trysts which he had to deal with. At last spake the lady, and said, "Now must I leave thee for a little, and thou wottest where and how we shall meet next, and meanwhile disport thee as thou wilt, so that thou weary not thyself, for I love to see thee joyous." Then she arose, stately and grand, but she kissed Walter on the mouth ere she turned to go out of the hall. The maid followed her. But or ever she was quite gone, she stooped and made that sign, and looked over her shoulder at Walter, as if in entreaty to him, and there was fear and anguish in her face, but he nodded his head to her in yea say of the tryst in the hazel copse, and in a trice she was gone. Walter went down the hall, and forth into the early night. But in the jaws of the porch he came up against the king's son, who, gazing at his attire, glittering with all its gems in the moonlight, laughed out, and said, "Now may it be seen how thou art risen in degree above me, whereas I am but a king's son, and that a king of a far country, whereas thou art a king of kings, or shalt be this night, yea, and of this very country wherein we both are." Now Walter saw the mock which lay under his words, but he kept back his wrath, and answered, "Fair sir, art thou as well contented with thy lot as when the sun went down? Hast thou no doubt or fear? Will the maid verily keep tryst with thee, Or hath she given thee yea say, but to escape thee this time? Or again, may she not turn to the lady, and appeal to her against thee? Now when he had spoken these words, he repented thereof, and feared for himself and the maid, lest he had stirred some misgiving in that young man's foolish heart. But the king's son did but laugh, and answered nought but to Walter's last words, and said, Yea, yea, this word of thine showeth how little thou wottest of that which lieth betwixt my darling and thine. Doth the lamb appeal from the shepherd to the wolf? Even so shall the maid appeal from me to thy lady. What? Ask thy lady at thy leisure what her want hath been with her thrall. She shall think it a fair tale to tell thee thereof. But thereof is my maid all whole now by reason of her wisdom in leechcraft, or somewhat more. And now I tell thee again, that the beforesaid maid must needs do my will. For if I be the deep sea, and I deem not so ill of myself, that other one is the devil. As belike thou shalt find out for thyself later on. Yea, all is well with me, and more than well. And therewith he swung merrily into the litten hall. But Walter went out into the moonlit night, and wandered about for an hour or more, and stole warily into the hall, and thence into his own chamber. There he did off that royal array, and did his own raiment upon him. He girt him with sword and knife, took his bow and quiver, and stole down and out again, even as he had come in. Then he fetched a compass, and came down into the hazel coppice from the north, and lay hidden there while the night wore, till he deemed it would lack but little of midnight. Chapter 21. Walter and the maid flee from the golden house. There he abode amidst the hazels, hearkening every littlest sound, and the sounds were naught but the night voices of the wood, till suddenly there burst forth from the house a great wailing cry. Walter's heart came up into his mouth, but he had no time to do aught, for following hard on the cry came the sound of light feet close to him. The boughs were thrust aside, and there was come the maid, and she but in her white coat and barefoot. And then first he felt the sweetness of her flesh on his, for she caught him by the hand, and said breathlessly, Now, now, there may yet be time, or even too much it may be. For the saving of breath ask me no questions, but come. He dallied not, but went as she led, and they were light-foot, both of them. They went the same way, due south to wit, whereby he had gone a-hunting with the lady. And whiles they ran, and whiles they walked, but so fast they went, that by grey of the dawn they were come as far as that coppice or thicket of the lion. And still they hastened onward, and but little had the maid spoken, save here and there a word to hearten up Walter, and here and there a shy word of endearment. At last the dawn grew into early day, and as they came over the brow of a bent, they looked down over a plain land, whereas the trees grew scattermeal, and beyond the plain rose up the land into long green hills, and over those again were blue mountains, great and far away. Then spake the maid, Over yonder lie the outlying mountains of the Bears, and through them we needs must pass to our great peril. Nay, friend, she said, as he handled his sword hilt, it must be patience and wisdom to bring us through, and not the fallow blade of one man, though he be a good one. But look, below there runs a stream through the first of the plain, and I see nought for it but we must now rest our bodies. Moreover, I have a tale to tell thee, which is burning my heart, for may be there will be a pardon to ask of thee moreover, wherefore I fear thee. Quoth Walter, How may that be? She answered him not, but took his hand and led him down the bent. But he said, Thou sayest rest, but are we now out of all peril of the chase? She said, I cannot tell till I know what hath befallen her. If she be not to hand to set on her trackers, they will scarce happen upon us now, if it be not for that one. And she shuddered, and he felt her hand change as he held it. Then she said, But peril or no peril, needs must we rest, for I tell thee again, what I have to say to thee burneth my bosom for fear of thee, so that I can go no further until I have told thee. Then he said, I wot not of this queen, and her mightiness, and her servants. I will ask thereof later. But besides the others, is there not the king's son, he who loves thee so unworthily? She paled somewhat, and said, As for him, there had been naught for thee to fear in him, save his treason. But now shall he neither love nor hate any more. He died last midnight. Yea, and how? Said Walter. Nay, she said, let me tell my tale altogether once for all, lest thou blame me overmuch. But first we will wash us, and comfort us as best we may, and then, amidst our resting, shall the word be said. By then were they come down to the stream side, which ran fair in pools and stickles amidst rocks and sandy banks. She said, There behind the great grey rock is my bath, friend, and here is thine, and lo, the uprising of the sun. So she went her ways to the said rock, and he bathed him, and washed the night off him, and by then he was clad again. She came back fresh and sweet from the water, and with her lap full of cherries from a wilding which overhung her bath. So they sat down together on the green grass above the sand, and ate the breakfast of the wilderness, and Walter was full of content as he watched her, and beheld her sweetness and her loveliness. Yet were they, either of them, somewhat shy and shamefaced each with the other, so that he did but kiss her hands once and again, and though she shrank not from him, yet had she no boldness to cast herself into his arms. Chapter 22. Of the Dwarf and the Pardon. Now she began to say, My friend, now shall I tell thee what I have done for thee and me, and if thou have a mind to blame me, and punish me, yet remember first, that what I have done has been for thee, and our hope of happy life. Well, I shall tell thee. But therewithal her speech failed her, and springing up, she faced the bent and pointed with her finger, and she all deadly pale, and shaking so that she might scarce stand, and might speak no word, though a feeble gibbering came from her mouth. Walter leapt up, and put his arm about her, and looked whitherward she pointed, and at first saw nought, and then nought but a brown and yellow rock rolling down the bent, and then at last he saw that it was the evil thing which had met him when first he came into that land, and now it stood upright, and he could see that it was clad in a coat of yellow samite. Then Walter stooped down, and gat his bow into his hand, and stood before the maid while he nocked an arrow. But the monster made ready his tackle, while Walter was stooping down, and or ever he could loose, his bowstring twanged, and an arrow flew forth, and grazed the maid's arm above the elbow, so that the blood ran, and the dwarf gave forth a harsh and horrible cry. Then flew Walter's shaft, and true was it aimed, so that it smote the monster full on the breast, but fell down from him, as if he were made of stone. Then the creature set up his horrible cry again, and loosed withal, and Walter deemed that he had smitten the maid, for she fell down in a heap behind him. Then waxed Walter wood wroth, and cast down his bow and drew his sword, and strode forward towards the bent against the dwarf. But he roared out again, and there were words in his roar, and he said, Fool, thou shalt go free if thou wilt give up the enemy. And who, said Walter, is the enemy? Yelled the dwarf, She, the pink and white thing lying there, she is not dead yet, she is but dying for fear of me. Yea, she hath reason. I could have set the shaft in her heart as easily as scratching her arm, but I need her body alive, that I may wreak me on her. What wilt thou do with her? Said Walter. For now he had heard that the maid was not slain, he had waxed wary again, and stood watching his chance. The dwarf yelled so at his last word that no word came from the noise a while, and then he said, What will I with her? Let me at her, and stand by and look on, and then shalt thou have a strange tale to carry off with thee, for I will let thee go this while. Said Walter, But what need to wreak thee? What hath she done to thee? What need? What need? Roared the dwarf. Have I not told thee that she is the enemy? And thou askest of what she hath done. Of what? Fool, she is the murderer. She hath slain the lady that was our lady, and that made us, she whom we all worshipped and adored. O impudent fool! Therewith he knocked and loosed another arrow, which would have smitten Walter in the face, but that he lowered his head in the very nick of time. Then, with a great shout, he rushed up the bent, and was on the dwarf before he could get his sword out, and leaping aloft, dealt the creature a stroke amidmost of the crown, and so mightily he smote, that he drave the heavy sword right through to the teeth, so that he fell dead straightway. Walter stood over him a minute, and when he saw that he moved not, he went slowly down to the stream, whereby the maid yet lay, cowering down and quivering all over, and covering her face with her hands. Then he took her by the wrist, and said, Up, maiden, up, and tell me this tale of the slaying. But she shrunk away from him, and looked at him with wild eyes, and said, What hast thou done with him? Is he gone? He is dead, said Walter. I have slain him. There lies he with cloven skull on the bent side, unless, forsooth, he vanish away like the lion I slew, or else, perchance, he will come to life again. And art thou a lie, like to the rest of them? Let me hear of this slaying. She rose up, and stood before him trembling, and said, Oh, thou art angry with me, and thine anger I cannot bear. Ah, what have I done? Thou hast slain one, and I may be the other, and never had we escaped till both these twain were dead. Ah, thou dost not know, thou dost not know. O me, what shall I do to appease thy wrath? He looked on her, and his heart rose to his mouth at the thought of sundering from her. Still he looked on her, and her piteous friendly face melted all his heart. He threw down his sword, and took her by the shoulders, and kissed her face over and over, and strained her to him, so that he felt the sweetness of her bosom. Then he lifted her up like a child, and set her down on the green grass, and went down to the water, and filled his hat therefrom, and came back to her. Then he gave her to drink, and bathed her face and her hands, so that the colour came aback to the cheeks and lips of her. And she smiled on him, and kissed his hands, and said, Oh, now thou art kind to me. Yea, said he, and true it is that if thou hast slain, I have done no less, and if thou hast lied, even so have I. And if thou hast played the wanton, as I deem not that thou hast, I full surely have so done. So now thou shalt pardon me, and when thy spirit is come back to thee, thou shalt tell me thy tale in all friendship, and in all loving kindness will I hearken the same." Therewith he knelt before her, and kissed her feet. But she said, "Yea, yea, what thou willest, that will I do. But first tell me one thing. Hast thou buried this horror, and hidden him in the earth?" He deemed that fear had bewildered her, and that she scarcely yet knew how things had gone. But he said, "Fair sweet friend, I have not done it as yet, but now will I go and do it, if it seem good to thee." "Yea," she said, "but first must thou smite off his head, and lie it by his buttocks when he is in the earth, or evil things will happen else. This of the burying is no idle matter, I bid thee believe." "I doubt it not," said he. "Surely such malice as was in this one will be hard to slay." And he picked up his sword, and turned to go to the field of deed. She said, "I must needs go with thee. Terror hath so filled my soul that I durst not abide here without thee." So they went both together to where the creature lay. The maid durst not look on the dead monster, but Walter noted that he was girt with a big ungainly sax, so he drew it from the sheath, and there smote off the hideous head of the fiend with his own weapon. Then they twain together laboured the earth, she with Walter's sword, he with the ugly sax, till they had made a grave deep and wide enough, and therein they thrust the creature, and covered him up, weapons and all together. Chapter 23. Of the peaceful ending of that wild day. Thereafter Walter led the maid down again, and said to her, "Now, sweetling, shall the story be told." "Nay, friend," she said, "not here. This place hath been polluted by my craven fear, and the horror of the vile wretch, of whom no words may tell his vileness. Let us hence and onward. Thou seest I have once more come to life again." "But," said he, "thou hast been hurt by the dwarf's arrow." She laughed, and said, "Had I never had greater hurt from them than that, little had been the tale thereof. Yet whereas thou lookest dolorous about it, we will speedily heal it." Therewith she sought about, and found nigh the stream side certain herbs, and she spake words over them, and bade Walter lay them on the wound, which forsooth was of the least. And he did so, and bound a strip of his shirt about her arm, and then would she set forth. But he said, "Thou art all unshod, and, but if that be seen to, our journey shall be stayed by thy foot-soreness. I may make a shift to fashion thee brogues." She said, "I may well go barefoot, and in any case I entreat thee that we tarry here no longer, but go away hence, if it be but for a mile." And she looked piteously on him, so that he might not gainsay her. So then they crossed the stream, and set forward, when amidst all these haps the day was worn to mid-morning. But after they had gone a mile, they sat them down on a knoll under the shadow of a big thorn tree, within sight of the mountains. Then said Walter, "Now will I cut thee the brogues from the skirt of my buff coat, which shall be well meet for such work, and meanwhile shalt thou tell me thy tale." "Thou art kind," she said, "but be kinder yet, and abide my tale till we have done our day's work. For we were best to make no long delay here, because, though thou hast slain the king dwarf, yet there be others of his kindred who swarm in some parts of the wood as the rabbits in a warren. Now true it is that they have but little understanding, less it may be than the very brute beasts, and that, as I said afore, unless they be set on our slot like to hounds, they shall have no inkling of where to seek us. Yet, might they happen upon us by mere misadventure. And moreover, friend, quoth she, blushing, I would beg of thee some little respite, for though I scarce fear thy wrath any more, since thou hast been so kind to me, yet is there shame in that which I have to tell thee. Wherefore, since the fairest of the day is before us, let us use it all we may, and, when thou hast done me my new foot-gear, get us gone forward again. He kissed her kindly, and yea said her asking. He had already fallen to work on the leather, and in a while had fashioned her the brogues. So she tied them to her feet, and arose with a smile, and said, Now am I hale and strong again, what with the rest, and what with thy loving kindness, and thou shalt see how nimble I shall be to leave this land, for as fair as it is. Since forsooth a land of lies it is, and of grief to the children of Adam. So they went their ways thence, and fared nimbly indeed, and made no stay till some 3 hours after noon, when they rested by a thicket side, where the strawberries grew plenty. They ate thereof what they would, and from a great oak hard by Walter shot him first one culver, and then another, and hung them to his girdle to be for their evening's meal. Sithence they went forward again, and naught befell them to tell of, till they were come, whenas it lacked scarce an hour of sunset, to the banks of another river, not right great, but bigger than the last one. There the maid cast herself down, and said, Friend, no further will thy friend go this even, nay, to say sooth, she cannot. So now we will eat of thy venison, and then shall my tale be, since I may no longer delay it, and thereafter shall our slumber be sweet and safe as I deem. She spake merrily now, and as one who feared nothing, and Walter was much heartened by her words and her voice, and he fell to and made a fire and a woodland oven in the earth, and sithence dighted his fowl, and baked them after the manner of woodmen. And they ate, both of them, in all love, and in good liking of life, and were much strengthened by their supper. And when they were done, Walter eked his fire, both against the chill of the midnight and dawning, and for a guard against wild beasts. And by that time night was come, and the moon arisen. Then the maiden drew up to the fire, and turned to Walter, and spake. Chapter 24. The maid tells of what had befallen her. Now, friend, by the clear of the moon and this firelight will I tell what I may and can of my tale. Thus it is, if I be wholly of the race of Adam, I wot not, nor can I tell thee how many years old I may be. For there are, as it were, shards or gaps in my life, wherein are but a few things dimly remembered, and doubtless many things forgotten. I remember well when I was a little child, and right happy, and there were people about me whom I loved, and who loved me. It was not in this land, but all things were lovely there, the year's beginning, the happy mid-year, the year's waning, the year's ending, and then again its beginning. That passed away, and then for a while is more than dimness, for naught I remember, save that I was. Thereafter I remember again, and am a young maiden, and I know some things, and long to know more. I am nowise happy. I am amongst people who bid me go, and I go, and do this, and I do it. None loveth me, none tormenteth me, but I wear my heart in longing for I scarce know what. Neither then am I in this land, but in a land that I love not, and a house that is big and stately, but naught lovely. Then is a dim time again, and sithence a time not right clear, an evil time, wherein I am older, well nigh grown to womanhood. There are a many folk about me, and they foul, and greedy, and hard, and my spirit is fierce, and my body feeble. And I am set to tasks that I would not do by them that are unwiser than I, and smitten I am by them that are less valiant than I, and I know lack, and stripes, and diverse misery. But all that is now become but a dim picture to me, save that amongst all these unfriends is a friend to me, an old woman, who telleth me sweet tales of other life, wherein all is high and goodly, or at the least valiant and doughty. And she setteth hope in my heart, and learneth me, and maketh me to know much, oh much, so that at last I am grown wise, and wise to be mighty if I durst. Yet am I nought in this land all this while, but, as meseemeth, in a great and foul city. And then, as it were, I fall asleep, and in my sleep is nought, save here and there a wild dream, some deal lovely, some deal hideous, but of this dream is my mistress a part, and the monster withal, whose head thou didst cleave to-day. But when I am awakened from it, then am I verily in this land, and myself as thou seest me to-day. And the first part of my life here is this, that I am in the pillared hall yonder, half clad, and with bound hands, and the dwarf leadeth me to the lady, and I hear his horrible croak, as he saith, Lady, will this one do? And then the sweet voice of the lady saying, This one will do, thou shalt have thy reward. Now, set thou the token upon her. Then I remember the dwarf dragging me away, and my heart sinking for fear of him. But for that time he did me no more harm than the riveting upon my leg this iron ring, which here thou seest. So from that time forward I have lived in this land, and been the thrall of the lady. And I remember my life here day by day, and no part of it has fallen into the dimness of dreams. Thereof will I tell thee but little, but this I will tell thee, that in spite of my past dreams, or it may be because of them, I had not lost the wisdom which the old woman had erst learned me, and for more wisdom I longed. Maybe this longing shall now make both thee and me happy, but for the passing time it brought me grief. For at first my mistress was indeed wayward with me, but as any great lady might be with her bought thrall, whiles caressing me, and whiles chastising me, as her mood went. But she seemed not to be cruel of malice, or with any set purpose. But so it was, rather little by little, than by any great sudden uncovering of my intent, that she came to know that I also had some of the wisdom whereby she lived her queenly life. That was about 2 years after I was first her thrall, and 3 weary years have gone by since she began to see in me the enemy of her days. Now why or wherefore I know not, but it seemeth that it would not avail her to slay me outright, or suffer me to die, but naught withheld her from piling up griefs and miseries on my head. At last she set her servant, the dwarf, upon me, even he whose head thou clavest to-day. Many things I bore from him, whereof it were unseemly for my tongue to tell before thee. But the time came when he exceeded, and I could bear no more, and then I showed him this sharp knife, wherewith I would have thrust me through to the heart if thou hadst not pardoned me e'en now. And I told him that if he forbore me not, I would slay, not him, but myself. And this he might not away with, because of the commandment of the lady, who had given him the word that in any case I must be kept living. And her hand, withal, fear held somewhat hereafter. Yet was there need to me of all my wisdom, for with all this her hatred grew, and wiles raged within her so furiously that it overmastered her fear, and at such times she would have put me to death if I had not escaped her by some turn of my law. Now further, I shall tell thee that somewhat more than a year ago hither to this land came the King's son, the second goodly man, as thou art the third, whom her sorceries have drawn hither since I have dwelt here. Forsooth, when he first came, he seemed to us, to me, and yet more to my lady, to be as beautiful as an angel, and sorely she loved him, and he her, after his fashion. But he was light-minded and cold-hearted, and in a while he must needs turn his eyes upon me, and offer me his love, which was but foul and unkind, as it turned out. For when I nay said him, as maybe I had not done, save for fear of my mistress, he had no pity upon me, but spared not to lead me into the trap of her wrath, and leave me without help or a good word. But, O friend, in spite of all grief and anguish, I learned still, and waxed wise and wiser, abiding the day of my deliverance, which has come, and thou art come. Therewith she took Walter's hands and kissed them, but he kissed her face, and her tears wet her lips. Then she went on, but sithence, months ago, the lady began to weary of this dastard, despite of his beauty, and then it was thy turn to be swept into her net. I partly guess how. For on a day in broad daylight, as I was serving my mistress in the hall, and the evil thing, whose head is now cloven, was lying across the threshold of the door, as it were a dream fell upon me, though I strove to cast it off for fear of chastisement. For the pillared hall wavered, and vanished from my sight, and my feet were treading a rough stone pavement instead of the marble wonder of the hall, and there was the scent of the salt sea, and of the tackle of ships, and behind me were tall houses, and before me the ships indeed, with their ropes beating, and their sails flapping, and their masts wavering. And in mine ears was the hail and howl of mariners, things that I had seen and heard in the dimness of my life gone by. And there was I, and the dwarf before me, and the lady after me, going over the gangway aboard of a tall ship, and she gathered way, and was gotten out of the haven, and straightway I saw the mariners cast abroad their ancient. Quoth Walter, What then? Sawest thou the blazon thereon, of a wolf-like beast ramping up against a maiden? And that might well have been thou? She said, Yea, so it was, but refrain thee, that I may tell on my tale. The ship and the sea vanished away, but I was not back in the hall of the Golden House, and again were we three in the street of the selfsame town which we had but just left, but somewhat dim was my vision thereof, and I saw little, save the door of a goodly house before me, and speedily it died out, and we were again in the pillared hall, wherein my thraldom was made manifest. Maiden, said Walter, one question I would ask thee, to wit, didst thou see me on the quay by the ships? Nay, she said, there were many folk about, but they were all as images of the aliens to me. Now hearken further. 3 months thereafter came the dream upon me again, when we were all three together in the pillared hall, and again was the vision somewhat dim. Once more we were in the street of a busy town, but all unlike to that other one, and there were men standing together on our right hands by the door of a house. Yea, yea, quoth Walter, and forsooth one of them was who but I. Refrain thee, beloved, she said, for my tale draweth to its ending, and I would have thee hearken heedfully, for maybe thou shalt once again deem my deed past pardon. Some 20 days after this last dream, I had some leisure for my mistress's service, so I went to disport me by the well of the oak tree. Or forsooth, she might have set in my mind the thought of going there, that I might meet thee, and give her some occasion against me. And I sat thereby, no wise loving the earth, but sick at heart, because of late the king's son had been more than ever instant with me to yield him my body, threatening me else with casting me into all that the worst could do to me of torments and shames day by day. I say my heart failed me, and I was well nigh brought to the point of yea saying his desires, that I might take the chance of something befalling me that were less bad than the worst. But here must I tell thee a thing, and pray thee to take it to heart. This, more than aught else, had given me strength to naysay that dastard, that my wisdom both hath been, and now is, the wisdom of a wise maid, and not of a woman, and all the might thereof shall I lose with my maidenhead. Evil wilt thou think of me then, for all was I tried so sore, that I was at point to cast it all away, so wretchedly as I shrank from the horror of the lady's wrath. But there, as I sat pondering these things, I saw a man coming, and thought no otherwise thereof, but that it was the king's son, till I saw the stranger drawing near, and his golden hair, and his grey eyes, and then I heard his voice, and his kindness pierced my heart, and I knew that my friend had come to see me, and oh friend, these tears are for the sweetness of that past hour. Said Walter, I came to see my friend, I also. Now have I noted what thou badest me, and I will forbear all as thou commandest me, till we be safe out of the desert, and far away from all evil things. But wilt thou ban me from all caresses? She laughed amidst of her tears, and said, O nay, poor lad, if thou wilt be but wise. Then she leaned toward him, and took his face betwixt her hands, and kissed him oft, and the tears started in his eyes for love and pity of her. Then she said, Alas, friend, even yet mayest thou doom me guilty, and all thy love may turn away from me, when I have told thee all that I have done for the sake of thee and me. Oh, if then there might be some chastisement for the guilty woman, and not mere sundering. Fear nothing, sweetling, said he, for indeed I deem that already I know partly what thou hast done. She sighed, and said, I will tell thee next, that I banned thy kissing and caressing of me till to-day, because I knew that my mistress would surely know if a man, if thou, hadst so much as touched a finger of mine in love. It was to try me herein that on the morning of the hunting she kissed and embraced me, till I almost died thereof, and showed thee my shoulder and my limbs, and to try thee withal, if thine eye should glister, or thy cheek flush thereat. For indeed she was raging in jealousy of thee. Next, my friend, even whiles we were talking together at the well of the rock, I was pondering on what we should do to escape from this land of lies. Maybe thou wilt say, Why didst thou not take my hand and flee with me as we fled to-day? Friend, it is most true that were she not dead, we had not escaped thus far. For her trackers would have followed us, set on by her, and brought us back to an evil fate. Therefore I tell thee, that from the first I did plot the death of those two, the dwarf and the mistress. For no otherwise mightest thou live, or I escape from death in life. But as to the dastard who threatened me with a thrall's pains, I heeded him naught to live or die, for well I knew that thy valiant sword, yea, or thy bare hands, would speedily tame him. Now first I knew that I must make a show of yielding to the king's son, and somewhat how I did therein thou knowest. But no night and no time did I give him to bed me, till after I had met thee, as thou wentest to the golden house, before the adventure of fetching the lion's skin. And up to that time I had scarce known what to do, save ever to bid thee, with sore grief and pain, to yield thee to the wicked woman's desire. But as we spake together, there by the stream, and I saw that the evil thing, whose head thou clavest e'en now, was spying on us, then amidst the sickness of terror which ever came over me whensoever I thought of him, and much more when I saw him, he is dead now, it came flashing into my mind how I might destroy my enemy. Therefore I made the dwarf my messenger to her, by bidding thee to my bed in such wise that he might hear it. And wot thou well that he speedily carried her the tidings. Meanwhile I hastened to lie to the king's son, and all privily bade him come to me, and not thee. And thereafter, by dint of waiting and watching, and taking the only chance that there was, I met thee as thou camest back from fetching the skin of the lion that never was, and gave thee that warning, or else had we been undone indeed. Said Walter, Was the lion of her making, or of thine, then? She said, Of hers. Why should I deal with such a matter? Yea, said Walter, but she verily swooned, and she was verily wroth with the enemy. The maid smiled, and said, If her lie was not like very sooth, then had she not been the craftsmaster that I knew her. One may lie otherwise than with the tongue alone. Yet indeed her wrath against the enemy was naught feigned, for the enemy was even I, and in these latter days never did her wrath leave me. But to go on with my tale. Now doubt thou not, that, when thou camest into the hall yester-eve, the mistress knew of thy counterfeit tryst with me, and meant naught but death for thee, yet first would she have thee in her arms again. Therefore did she make much of thee at table, and that was partly for my torment also, and therefore did she make that tryst with thee, and deemed doubtless that thou wouldst not dare to forego it, even if thou shouldst go to me thereafter. Now I had trained that dastard to me, as I have told thee, but I gave him a sleepy draught, so that when I came to the bed he might not move toward me, nor open his eyes, but I lay down beside him, so that the lady might know that my body had been there, for well had she wotted if it had not. Then, as there I lay, I cast over him thy shape, so that none might have known but that thou wert lying by my side. And there, trembling, I abode what should befall. Thus I passed through the hour, whenas thou shouldest have been at her chamber, and the time of my tryst with thee was come as the mistress would be deeming, so that I looked for her speedily, and my heart well nigh failed me for fear of her cruelty. Presently then I heard a stirring in her chamber, and I slipped from out the bed, and hid me behind the hangings, and was like to die for fear of her. And lo, presently she came stealing in softly, holding a lamp in one hand, and a knife in the other. And I tell thee of a sooth that I also had a sharp knife in my hand, to defend my life if need were. She held the lamp up above her head, before she drew near to the bedside, and I heard her mutter, She is not there then, but she shall be taken. Then she went up to the bed, and stooped over it, and laid her hand on the place where I had lain, and therewith her eyes turned to that false image of thee lying there, and she fell a trembling and shaking, and the lamp fell to the floor and was quenched. But there was bright moonlight in the room, and still I could see what betid. But she uttered a noise like the low roar of a wild beast, and I saw her arm and hand rise up, and the flashing of the steel beneath the hand, and then down came the hand and the steel, and I went nigh to swooning, lest perchance I had wrought over well, and thine image were thy very self. The dastard died without a groan. Why should I lament him? I cannot. But the lady drew him toward her, and snatched the clothes from off his shoulders and breast, and fell a gibbering, sounds mostly without meaning, but broken here and there with words. Then I heard her say, I shall forget, and the new days shall come. Then was there silence of her a little, and thereafter she cried out in a terrible voice, Oh no, 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 I cannot forget, I cannot forget. And she raised a great wailing cry that filled all the night with horror. Didst thou not hear it? And caught up the knife from the bed, and thrust it into her breast, and fell down a dead heap over the bed, and onto the man whom she had slain. And then I thought of thee, and joy smote across my terror. How shall I gainsay it? And I fled away to thee, and I took thine hands in mine, thy dear hands, and we fled away together. Shall we be still together? He spoke slowly, and touched her not. And she, forbearing all sobbing and weeping, sat looking wistfully on him. He said, I think thou hast told me all, and whether thy guile slew her, or her own evil heart, she was slain last night, who lay in mine arms the night before. It was ill, and ill done of me, for I loved not her, but thee, and I wished for her death, that I might be with thee. Thou wottest this, and still thou lovest me, it may be overweeningly. What have I to say then? If there be any guilt of guile, I also was in the guile, and if there be any guilt of murder, I also was in the murder. Thus we say to each other, and to God and his hallows we say, We two have conspired to slay the woman who tormented one of us, and would have slain the other. And if we have done amiss therein, then shall we two together pay the penalty, for in this have we done as one body and one soul. Therewith he put his arms about her and kissed her, but soberly and friendly, as if he would comfort her. And thereafter he said to her, Maybe tomorrow, in the sunlight, I will ask thee of this woman what she verily was, but now let her be. And thou art overwearied, and I bid thee sleep. So he went about, and gathered of bracken a great heap for her bed, and did his coat thereover, and led her thereto. And she lay down meekly, and smiled, and crossed her arms over her bosom, and presently fell asleep. But as for him, he watched by the fireside, till dawn began to glimmer, and then he also laid him down and slept. Chapter 25 of the triumphant summer array of the Maid. When the day was bright, Walter arose, and met the Maid coming from the river bank, fresh and rosy from the water. She paled a little when they met face to face, and she shrank from him shyly. But he took her hand, and kissed her frankly, and the two were glad, and had no need to tell each other of their joy, though much else they deemed they had to say, could they have found words thereto. So they came to their fire, and sat down, and fell to breakfast, and ere they were done, the Maid said, My master, thou seest we be come nigh unto the hill country, and to-day about sunset belike we shall come into the land of the Bear folk, and both it is that there is peril if we fall into their hands, and that we may scarce escape them. Yet I deem that we may deal with the peril by wisdom. What is the peril? Said Walter. I mean, what is the worst of it? Said the Maid. To be offered up in sacrifice to their God. "But if we escape death at their hands, what then?" said Walter. "One of two things," said she. "The first, that they shall take us into their tribe." "And will they sunder us in that case?" said Walter. "Nay," said she. Walter laughed, and said, "Therein is little harm then, but what is the other chance?" Said she, "That we leave them with their good will, and come back to one of the lands of Christendom." Said Walter, "I am not all so sure that this is the better of the two choices, though forsooth thou seemest to think so. But tell me now, what like is their God, that they should offer up newcomers to him?" "Their God is a woman," she said, "and the mother of their nation and tribes, or so they deem, before the days when they had chieftains and lords of battle." "That will be long ago," said he. "How then may she be living now?" Said the maid, "Doubtless that woman of yore agone is dead this many and many a year, but they take to them still a new woman, one after other, as they may happen on them, to be in the stead of the ancient mother. And to tell thee the very truth right out, she that lieth dead in the pillared hall was even the last of these, and now, if they knew it, they lack a God. This shall we tell them." "Yea, yea," said Walter, "a goodly welcome shall we have of them then, if we come amongst them with our hands red with the blood of their God." She smiled on him, and said, "If I come amongst them with the tidings that I have slain her, and they trow therein, without doubt they shall make me lady and goddess in her stead." "This is a strange word," said Walter, "but if so they do, how shall that further us in reaching the kindreds of the world, and the folk of Holy Church?" She laughed outright, so joyous was she grown, now that she knew that his life was yet to be a part of hers. "Sweetheart," she said, "now I see that thou desirest wholly what I desire. Yet in any case, abiding with them would be living and not dying, even as thou hadst it e'en now. But forsooth, they will not hinder our departure, if they deem me their God. They do not look for it, nor desire it, that their God should dwell with them daily. Have no fear." Then she laughed again, and said, "What? Thou lookest on me, and deemest me to be but a sorry image of a goddess, and me with my scanty coat, and bare arms, and naked feet. But wait, I know well how to array me when the time cometh. Thou shalt see it. And now, my master, were it not meet that we took to the road?" So they arose, and found a ford of the river that took the maid but to the knee, and so set forth up the greensward of the slopes, whereas there were but few trees, so went they faring toward the hill country. At the last they were come to the feet of the very hills, and in the hollows betwixt the buttresses of them grew nut and berry trees, and the greensward round about them was both thick and much flowery. There they stayed them, and dined, whereas Walter had shot a hare by the way, and they had found a bubbling spring under a grey stone in a bight of the coppice, wherein now the birds were singing their best. When they had eaten, and had rested somewhat, the maid arose, and said, "Now shall the Queen array herself, and seem like a very goddess." Then she fell to work, while Walter looked on, and she made a garland for her head of eglantine, where the roses were the fairest, and with mingled flowers of the summer she wreathed her middle about, and let the garland of them hang down to below her knees, and knots of the flowers she made fast to the skirts of her coat, and did them for arm rings about her arms, and for anklets and sandals for her feet. Then she set a garland about Walter's head, and then stood a little off from him, and set her feet together, and lifted up her arms, and said, "Lo now, Am I not as like to the mother of summer as if I were clad in silk and gold? And even so shall I be deemed by the folk of the Bear. Come now, thou shalt see how all shall be well." She laughed joyously, but he might scarce laugh for pity of his love. Then they set forth again, and began to climb the hills, and the hours wore as they went in sweet converse, till at last Walter looked on the maid, and smiled on her, and said, "One thing I would say to thee, lovely friend, to wit, wert thou clad in silk and gold, thy stately raiment might well suffer a few stains, or here and there a rent may be, but stately would it be still when the folk of the Bear should come up against thee. But as to this flowery array of thine, in a few hours it shall be all faded and naught. Nay, even now, as I look on thee, the meadow sweet that hangeth from thy girdle stead has waxen dull, and welted, and the blossoming eyebright that is for a hem to the little white coat of thee is already forgetting how to be bright and blue. What sayest thou then?" She laughed at his word, and stood still, and looked back over her shoulder, while with her fingers she dealt with the flowers about her side, like to a bird preening his feathers. Then she said, "Is it verily so as thou sayest? Look again." So he looked, and wondered, for lo, beneath his eyes the spires of the meadow-sweet grew crisp and clear again, the eyebright blossoms shone once more over the whiteness of her legs, the eglantine roses opened, and all was as fresh and bright as if it were still growing on its own roots. He wondered, and was even some deal aghast. But she said, "Dear friend, be not troubled. Did I not tell thee that I am wise in hidden lore? But in my wisdom shall be no longer any scathe to any man. And again, this my wisdom, as I told thee erst, shall end on the day whereon I am made all happy. And it is thou that shall wield it all, my master. Yet must my wisdom needs endure for a little season yet. Let us on then, boldly and happily."